for many of the villagers, Mr. Lee will continue to live in their hearts. Zainavan, Channel News Asia, New Delhi.
Well, your business and market roundup is coming up next. Here's Wei Du in our newsroom she'll tell you what you can expect.
Yeah, that's right with Sue. Up next, South Korea joins the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Plus, the risk of deflation returns to Japan. We'll speak to an economist on what that means for the country.
Singapore is a meritocracy, and these men have risen to the top by their own merit, their hard work and high performance. If all the 300 were to crash in one jumbo jet, then Singapore will disintegrate.
Without them, none of you would be enjoying life today in Singapore. I say this without any compunction.
Kuan Yew in his own words on meritocracy and governance on Channel News Asia.
This Saturday, family businesses. Is it time to professionalize?
If the professionals can run a better job and can do a better job than I do, they should be running the business and not me.
And find out why one class of residential properties are still doing well, even in depressed market conditions.
In the integrated development, you enjoy the entire facilities right within your own doorstep.
Money Mind, Saturday, 10:30 p.m.
Brought to you by Nissan Qashqai. And IG, the world's #1 CFD provider.
You're playing the China story right now.
Well, China is always about policy, and then a bit more policy. So we think the derivatives of China are a far less volatile and easy way to hold a China trade. The problem is if you own a Chinese equity, you can have a heart attack owning Chinese equities. They're up 5%, they're down 10%, they're up 15%.
This segment is brought to you by Thailand Convention and Exhibition Bureau.
Welcome back to Asia Connect. Another U.S. ally has joined the new Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. After months of agonized deliberations, South Korea has signed up to become a founding member of the China-backed bank. Korea is, of course, a key Washington ally in the region, and the U.S. has been very vocal about its misgivings over the new lender. But Korea's finance ministry says it has to put its national interests first. It says the AIIB will give Korean companies an edge on infrastructure projects in a region, especially when it comes to construction and telco sectors.
AIB가 향후 본격적으로 운행될 경우 아시아 지역에 대형 인프라 건설 시장이 열릴 것으로 예상되고 있습니다. 이러한 상황에서 한국의 AIB 참여 결정으로 건설, 통신, 교통 등 인프라 사업에 경험이 많은 우리 기업들의 사업 참여가 확대될 수 있습니다. 또한 AIB는 우리가 설립 시부터 주요 회원국으로 참여하게 되는 최초의 국제금융기구입니다.
More than 30 countries have expressed interest in joining the $50 billion institution. But Japan continues to sit on the fence. It says it remains cautious and it is in touch with Washington over its decision. Finance Minister Taro Aso also says China hasn't responded to his concerns over the bank's governance. Now, speaking of Japan, the country is once again on the brink of deflation. Consumer prices fell to zero last month. Economists say falling oil prices are the biggest drag, but so is weak demand at home. Now, household consumption continued its downward spiral as retail sales fell a worse than expected 1.8% last month. Some economists say this goes to show that the Bank of Japan can't afford to take its foot off the gas pedal. The BOJ has so far spent $1.3 trillion in bond purchases over the past 2 years. But zero inflation was not completely unexpected. Earlier this month, Governor Haruhiko Kuroda said dragging the country out of years of deflation was proving harder than initially thought. Takuji Okubo is the chief economist at Japan Macro Advisors. He joins me now from Tokyo. Takuji, you were spot on about the zero inflation rate. Question is, if the drag is lower oil prices, is that necessarily a bad thing for Japan?
No, I would say it's actually a good thing for Japan. So less spending on gasoline, that's great for consumers, so that consumer can spend their money elsewhere. That would increase demand for other goods. So I don't think there's any reason why Japan should fret about the falling oil prices.
So with that in mind, you don't think the BOJ should launch more stimulus at all?
I don't think so. I think we do see that the wage inflation is starting to pick up. So I think Bank of Japan should sit tight and try to see if the wage inflation is good enough to achieve their inflation target next year.
Yeah, speaking of those wage inflations, last year when we spoke, I know you were disappointed by how little people were getting. This year so far, at least from the best of the companies, people are getting 1.5% or so. Do you think that's good enough?
Well, that's not good enough. If Bank of Japan wants to achieve 2% inflation, wage would like to be, I would say, higher than 2%. But having said that, it is a good direction, and I do think wage inflation will continue to accelerate. Because when you look at the labor market, we also had that unemployment rate number, which fell from 3.6% to 3.5%. So that's tightening, and I think ongoing tightening in the labor market will force corporate managers to raise the wages.
No, in the very beginning, you were very skeptical about Abenomics, but it sounds like you've changed your mind. So this upswing we're seeing right now, you don't think that's purely cyclical? Something really changed about Japan?
Well, on that front, we always have to distinguish between short to medium term perspective and medium to longer term. Medium to longer term, I'm still skeptical if the Abenomics really succeed in turning Japan around. That I remain unchanged. But in terms of the next 12 to 18 months, I think Japan Inc. will have its good day.
Okay, I want to circle back to our top story. What's your view? Should Japan join the China-led AIIB?
Right. I personally think Japan can remain on the sideline. Of course, Japan doesn't want to be isolated. So if, let's say, United States is starting to start the process of joining AIIB, yes, Japan should follow, and together with US, Australia, South Korea, Japan should put effort in making AIIB clear and transparent infrastructure bank. But we have to realize, we have to think about, Japan is actually being asked to put taxpayers' money into that bank. So we do want to make sure that the tax money will be spent in a correct way. We don't want it to be spent to corrupt companies, corrupt the government officials. We don't want that. I think Asia has actually moved on from that kind of corruption as a business usual state. So I think in that respect, unless transparency is guaranteed, I don't think Japan should join.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your insights, Takuji. That was Takuji Okubo joining me live from Tokyo. Now, time now to take a look at Asian markets. Stocks are mixed in the region. This after a sell-off on Wall Street as investors ponder the implication of the airstrikes in Yemen and the security of oil supply coming out of the Middle East. Now, right now in Japan, the Nikkei is actually sitting up 0.4%, getting some help from a weaker Japanese yen. Over in China, the Shanghai Composite has managed to pare earlier losses. The market currently reapproaching the 3,700 level again as a slowing economy actually boosts easing expectations. And here in Southeast Asia, markets continue to trade. Right now, most of them actually a little bit weaker. Thailand's SCT lower by 0.2%. And these markets have been under pressure because investors fear the upcoming U.S. rate hike. Corporate profitability has stabilized somewhat in China. According to official data, industrial profits in the first 2 months fell 4% from a year before. Now that's still better than December, though, when profits fell twice as fast. I'll have more on business later on the show, but for now, it's back over to you, Wisu.
Well, thanks for that, Wei Du. Or the latest on the Germanwings crash in the French Alps and why the co-pilot is now under investigation. Plus,
but we've been making the calls and finding out who's got what and trying to buy as much as we can.
And we'll tell you why a chocolate war is brewing in the United States. Do stay with us.
The first of our founding fathers is no more. He inspired us, gave us courage, kept us together, and brought us here. We won't see another man like him.
He was the architect behind Singapore's rapid transformation and gave the once fledgling nation hope for the future. How will history remember the man who turned an impossible dream into reality? On Insight tonight at 9:30.
Having established itself as a strong domestic brand, Taitung Group's continuous upgrading of its technology and people promises to bring the company to the world stage as the international brand providing global fashion fabric. This is brought to you by Taitung Group Corporation.
Imagine traveling back in time to Singapore's darkest years. One family is about to do just that. It's a journey of survival.
The atrocities, the torture, executions, it's horrible.
Endurance.
Oh, hallelujah!
Yeah. And heartbreak.
It's so real to me now. I can feel the sadness.
A unique TV experiment not to be missed. Wartime Singapore, Sunday, 8 p.m. on Channel News Asia.
Hospitality, retail, residential. We see opportunity, we transform potential. OUE, transformational thinking.
Here's a reminder of our top story. Some 150,000 people are estimated to have paid their last respects to Singapore's first Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. The queue for Parliament House starts from the Padang, but members of the public are strongly advised not to join the queue now. And that is because the waiting time today, as of noon, is 8 hours. Members of the public are instead encouraged to visit community sites at 18 locations island-wide to pay their respects to the late Mr. Lee. The lying-in state is open 24 hours a day but will end on Saturday at 8 p.m. Now, if you are going to join the queue, Ho Yini shows us the route there.
If you're going to Parliament House, the easiest way is to use public transport. If you're taking the trains, come to City Hall, exit A at Raffles City Shopping Mall, and turn right.
Head towards the junction of Beach Road and Stamford Road.
From where I am at Stamford Road, the Padang is just across the road. Watch out for these ushers with black armbands. They'll guide you to where you need to go.
Right there, Bangga. If you are 16 and above, right side. For elderly. Sir, yes sir, this way sir.
The weather this week has been punishing. Along the route, ushers and volunteers will be handing out water, snacks and umbrellas to shield you from the scorching heat. Portable toilets are also available along the way.
Once you get to the Padang, members of the public will be directed into two queues. Now, if you're the elderly, if you're pregnant, have special needs or have children less than 6 years old, just follow this path and that will take you directly to Parliament House. Now, for the rest of us, just follow the line onto the Padang Green and join the queue.
But the queue doesn't end at the Padang. From here, it continues out onto Connaught Drive and along the pedestrian walkway hugging the Singapore River. This will take you past the Fullerton Road underpass, past the Asian Civilizations Museum, before reaching Parliament House. The wait can take several hours.
Before you enter Parliament House, you have to go through security. Now, this is where things can get a little congested. So to help ease the flow, remember to remove metal or any other items that could trigger the alarm.
Once through, you'll be ushered into Parliament House, where the body of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew lies in state.
The exit from Parliament House leads you straight back out onto the Padang. Parliament House will be open round the clock until Saturday 8 p.m. for members of the public to pay their final respects to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Latest updates may be found on the Remembering LKY Facebook page.
Thanks very much. That was Ho Yini explains to us exactly how, if you want to pay respects to the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew at Parliament House, what the best route that you can take. Let's join Olivia Seung now. She is at the Kallang Theatre in Singapore. Olivia, a joint memorial was held at Kallang Theatre earlier. Do tell us more about that.
Yes, Wei Su. Well, the joint memorial ceremony has just ended for the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and we're here at the Kallang Theatre, which is a place that's really fitting to remember Mr. Lee, as this was the place where Mr. Lee had held his last National Day rally and given his last speech as Prime Minister at the National Day rally back in 1990. Now, this memorial ceremony was organized by 8 organizations from the Chinese, Malay, Indian and Eurasian communities. More than 2,000 people attended the memorial, including leaders from Singapore's public and private sector and others from community and cultural organizations. Now, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and his wife, Madam Ho Ching, were also in attendance, along with other cabinet ministers. Now, at the start of the ceremony, a minute of silence was observed, and after that, several speeches followed. Now, speaking first was Deputy Prime Minister and Home Affairs Minister Teo Chee Hean. Now, he noted that the gathering today of people from all races is testament to Mr. Lee's vision of a multiracial Singapore. He also added that Mr. Lee had understood the importance of inculcating a sense of belonging and ownership for every Singaporean, that all were Singaporeans first, regardless of race. Now, Mr. Lee also said that Mr. Lee and his multiracial team were determined to build Singapore on the foundation of multiracialism. This is having seen the dangers if differences were exploited. And these were not just ideologies, but they were translated to policies and programs that we've seen here in Singapore, as seen in how schools are not segregated by race, how bilingualism is promoted, how the working language, there's a common working language in English, but at the same time, meritocracy also promoted, so that it is hard work and abilities that count and not ethnicity. Now, after Mr. Teo's speech, 4 community leaders representing the 4 ethnic groups here in Singapore took turns to speak, some sharing their personal encounters that they had with Mr. Lee, as well as handing over letters of condolence to Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. Now, if there was one thing in common that all these community leaders had said, was they expressed how each of their communities have benefited from Mr. Lee's stance on multiculturalism, multiracialism, and the support that each of these communities have received from him, giving them space as well as equal opportunity. And moving forward, they also called on Singaporeans and their communities to continue to strengthen this multiculturalism, multiracialism that we see in Singapore, to ensure the country continues to remain peaceful and united. Now, at the end of this ceremony, before taking his leave, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong stood up. He turned to the crowd and said, "Thank you, everyone." And this was followed by a round of applause. And you can just feel that immense sense of gratitude for the work that Mr. Lee has done for the country. Back to you, Wei Su.
Thanks very much indeed, Olivia. Olivia Seung there highlighting the main points of a joint memorial held for the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew at Kallang Theatre. Let's move on to some other news from the rest of the world now. The co-pilot of the Germanwings plane, which crashed in the French Alps on Wednesday, deliberately slammed the plane into the mountain, killing all 150 people on board. This, according to authorities. The cockpit voice recorder shows co-pilot Andreas Lubitz locking himself in after the captain left the flight deck. He then manually put the plane into a steep descent. Prosecutors say the captain tried to force his way in, slamming against the cockpit door. But within minutes, the plane crashed.
Je pense que les victimes ne se sont rendues compte qu'au dernier moment, au tout dernier moment. Puisque dans la bande audio qu'on écoute, les cris interviennent que juste dans les derniers instants, juste avant l'impact.
The co-pilot's motive remains a mystery. Police have ruled out a terrorist attack after searching his homes for clues to his actions. Responding to the revelation, Germanwings owner Lufthansa defended the selection of its pilots.
I think it has been a single occasion, but as I mentioned before in German, we will get together with the various experts in the Lufthansa Group Airlines, in the authorities, with our German government to see if our procedures can be refined.
Earlier, we spoke with Professor William Waldock from the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. He says there is a need to review cockpit security procedures.
To be locked out of the cockpit and unable to get back in, especially with the armored doors that are required after 9/11, we need to figure out another way to get access for the crew, so something like this doesn't happen again. The weakest points in pilot selection, we don't do a very good job in screening them for psychological problems or psychiatric problems. And we actually have had a few examples before. In the United States, we a few years ago had a JetBlue captain literally have a mental breakdown in the cockpit. The co-pilot managed to get him out of the cockpit, locked the door, and he couldn't get back in, and he was tackled by some of the passengers, and he ended up in a mental hospital. So obviously it does happen more than once.
Several airlines have now introduced a so-called rule of two. That means 2 pilots must be in the cockpit at all times. Amongst them, Norwegian Air, EasyJet, Air Transat, and all Canadian carriers. The rule is said to be already routine amongst US carriers. Other news, Yemen's President Abdul Rabbu Mansur Hadi has arrived in Saudi Arabia's capital Riyadh after fleeing the conflict in his country. His arrival comes as a Saudi-led coalition continued to launch airstrikes against Shia Houthi rebels who have taken over much of Yemen and driven out President Hadi. In response, the Houthis called the airstrikes a Saudi declaration of war. Their leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi accused the US, Saudi Arabia and Israel of launching a campaign aimed at invading and occupying Yemen. The airstrikes have also sparked protests in Yemen, with online Houthi supporters threatening to storm Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, along with the UAE, is at the forefront of the coalition of Sunni Arab states to fight extremism in countries such as Yemen, Syria, Iraq and Libya. Well, a sweet treat is under threat in the United States. Fans of British chocolate are up in arms after Cadbury's chocolate bars made in the UK were forced off American shelves. Our US Bureau Chief Simon Marks with this report.
Hello.
At Tea and Sympathy in the heart of New York's Greenwich Village, there's a chocolate rush underway. They've been proudly selling British products to New Yorkers here for a quarter of a century, but never as in the past few weeks.
Whoops, that wasn't so brilliant.
Owner Nikki Perry, originally from the London suburb of Blackheath, says she's struggling to keep up with demand for British-made, British chocolate.
I've got a stash, a small stash, but we've been making the calls and finding out who's got what and trying to buy as much as we can.
The reason for the panic, a legal move by the US chocolate manufacturer Hershey to halt the import of British-made Cadbury's chocolate. Hershey's say they have the exclusive right to the Cadbury's name in America, make their own version of Cadbury's bars in their American factories, and argue imports of the British-made stuff are causing consumer confusion on the shelves of the USA. And why is that a problem? Well, Nikki Perry and thousands of expats like her say that like a proper English tea, the Americans haven't got a clue how to make real British chocolate.
It is not chocolate. It tastes like wax. It's only got 11% cocoa in it. To most people in England, it's inedible.
Crunch is a very hard candy to get.
Charles Walker knows what he's talking about. His mother out on Long Island has got the taste for crunchy bars. And when she heard they were about to disappear from the shelves, she told him to get his skates on.
I'm reading it online on my phone, actually, and there was an article about it. And I'm like, okay, they're probably not going to have it anymore. So she told me yesterday, you need to get down there right away.
Rubbing salt in the campaigners' chocolate wounds is the use of the royal warrant on the American-produced version of Cadbury's chocolate, the symbol that suggests this is the chocolate bar that Britain's Queen Elizabeth eats. Except, of course, it isn't. At Tea and Sympathy and specialty grocery shops across the US, a campaign is underway to try and get the ban on British-made chocolate overturned. It's worth $50 million a year in sales, and for many of these small businesses, that can be the difference between remaining open or shutting down.
I mean, if I don't have chocolate at Christmas time, that's me done. That will be me gone out of business. We had a hospital shut down and we fought it for 3 years. We had the neighbourhood come out and some celebrities come out and the politicians come out. This chocolate is 150 times more, at least. It's gone round the whole world. People are absolutely incensed by this.
But imports have already stopped. The importers say they cannot win what they call a David and Goliath legal struggle with Hershey's, one of America's biggest food manufacturers. Campaigners, though, aren't giving up and vow one day to savour the sweet taste of victory. Simon Marks, Channel News Asia, New York.
Away Jews back after the break with more business news. Also ahead. Sports and the latest from an international friendly between Singapore and Thailand. That story coming up in just a minute.
Singapore is a meritocracy, and these men have risen to the top by their own merit. their hard work and high performance. If all the 300 were to crash in one jumbo jet, then Singapore will disintegrate.
Without them, none of you would be enjoying life today in Singapore. I say this without any compunction.
Lee Kuan Yew in his own words on meritocracy and governance on Channel News Asia.
She's fondly remembered by her students from the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts.
She's very patient, very encouraging, and forever cheerful.
她在跟你改的时候呢，她是非常认真的。
Of all the teachers at Nanyang, she's the best.
She's an artist ahead of her time.
Georgette holds a very special place in Singapore's art history, being the first female artist to have achieved such success, and more importantly on the impact and influence that she has had on the development of our artists in Singapore.
The life and legacy of Singapore's most prominent female artist on The Worlds of Georgette Chen premieres 29th April on Channel News Asia. Brought to you by the National Gallery, Singapore.
When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I would help my neighbor sell ota. Every 10 pieces I sell, I'll make 10 cents. Since I've got not much of education, so I better work hard.
With determination and hard work, Sun Cho grew from a neighborhood hardware shop into a multi-million-dollar business. Local entrepreneur Albert Oon shares his story. Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. on Channel News Asia.
This program is brought to you by Shunjo Group.
Welcome back to Asia Connect. All eyes are back on the U.S. Fed tonight as Janet Yellen speaks on monetary policy in San Francisco. Wall Street has been fine-tuning positions since the central bank issued its last policy statement more than a week ago. Now, there is also final reading of the U.S. fourth quarter GDP. Economists expect a slight upward revision to 2.4%. David Carbon joins me now to give us a bit of context on these. He's a chief economist at DBS Research. Now, David, people talk about decoupling again, that the U.S. will just go ahead and achieve growth without the rest of the world. Since decoupling didn't work out last time, will it work out this time?
Probably not. I think that's the key here. We had a couple of very strong quarters in the middle of last year, Q2 and Q3, growth up around 5%. It really took, it was sort of a head fake. Everybody thought it was strength per se. It never was. It was payback for a very sharp contraction in the first quarter. And what we're getting now in the fourth quarter, as everybody knows, growth has fallen way back to 2.25%, maybe slightly more. And even beyond the fourth quarter now, we're moving into the first quarter. And it's pretty clear that we're going to have growth of sub 2%, probably 1.5% in the first quarter. So those two very strong quarters in Q2 and Q3 are now going to be followed by two very weak quarters, once again, 2% on average, or slightly less. So it's very much back to the grind. It was a head fake in the middle of last year. Everybody got, know, the hoopla went up and up and up, and everybody was talking about hikes, and now it's going to be back to the old grind again.
You know, when the U.S. economy was strong, a lot of people gave credit to the shale revolution. With that that in mind, do you think we've been underestimating how bad this oil drop is going to be for the U.S.?
The jury's out on whether for the U.S. it's really bad or good, or for the global economy overall it's bad or good. The real point is the U.S. is not taking off like so many people thought it was. It never was taking off like so many people thought it was. And more people are starting to realize this, and give it another month or two, and almost everybody's going to come to the conclusion that, holy smokes, this quote-unquote divergence that everybody's talked about for the last 6 months is just a myth if you're talking about it in terms of the real economy. The U.S. is still grinding along at sort of a 2%, maybe 2.25% sort of growth rate. It never was taking off. There's no rush to be hiking interest rates, et cetera, et cetera. When
growth is between 2 and 2.5%, do you think it's the right time for the Fed to hike?
Well, there's lots of reasons to be holding off. We've still got a lot of unemployed labor out there, millions of people still without jobs. The official unemployment rate is frankly, it's bogus. It's not very meaningful at all. We've got a large overhang still in household balance sheets. We've got a large overhang still in terms of investment and so on. So we've got, the U.S. is recovering. We're getting decent job growth and so on, but it just dug such a big hole that we're not out of that hole yet. So we've got a ways to go. Inflation is key here, right? Everybody talks about it. We know it's key. The Fed is focusing on this. The Fed's favorite index of inflation is the core PCE deflator. And inflation by that measure has been getting slower and slower and slower and slower for 3 full years. This is not something brand new. It's not coming off the weak oil prices. This is something which has been going on for 3 years, and it's still ticking down and down and down.
Okay.
If inflation's getting lower and lower, there's simply no reason for the Fed to be worried about hiking rates at this point. There's no reason for the Fed to be pursuing this while inflation is going down, let alone running stable or starting to tick back upwards towards its target.
All right. Thank you so much, David, for sharing that contrarian view. That was David Carbon, Chief Economist at DBS Research. The U.S. hotel industry is certainly feeling the pinch of a strong U.S. dollar. Recent data suggests tourist flows have started to slow, even in iconic destinations such as New York City. On the flip side, though, the city is still drawing a lot of investor interest, especially from the Chinese. William Danslow reports from New York.
The flow of tourists into New York City may be slowing down. According to hotel researcher STR, average occupancy in January was down 4.7% compared to the year before. With the dollar index up around 10% so far this year, the rising price of coming to the US could be taking its toll.
Whether you're having a cup of coffee or, going to see something like a visit to the Empire State Building is quite expensive because of the dollar.
You finish the day with $200 like this, when I didn't talk about shopping even.
But the data doesn't tell the whole story. January is often a slow month for tourism in New York, and experts say, stronger dollar or not, the city will always appeal to tourists.
New York City is such a unique destination. In tourism, we would call it a status area. So it's the kind of place where you would really want to go, even if it's going to cost you a little bit more money. Very few cities in the world have the same presence as New York.
And for industry expert Hilda Perez Alvarado, she says despite weakness in the global economy, there are still those willing to travel.
I think there will be a bit of an offset or a reshifting in terms of the city being less dependent on euro-denominated travelers and more so on the unprecedented growth that we're seeing from other markets.
If tourists might be getting cold feet about coming to New York, investors aren't. Over the last 5 years, the number of hotel rooms in the city has grown roughly by 4% annually for the past 5 years. And hotel experts say much of that attention is coming from overseas, especially from China.
In 2013, we had offshore buyers account for about 12% of total transaction volume in New York City. Last year, that number increased to 58%.
A sign that people around the world still see New York's hotel industry as a long-term investment. Because many holidaymakers book their trips months in advance, it could be a while before we know for sure how much of an impact this strong dollar is having. But many experts are confident that New York will remain a tourist hub, even if it costs a couple of extra dollars. William Denslow, Channel News Asia, New York.
And that does it for Business on Asia Connect. It's now back over to you, Wisu.
Thanks for that update from business. And it's time for sports. And we start with football. And Thailand have beaten Singapore in an international friendly and karat. Both teams wore black armbands and held a minute's silence before kickoff in memory of Singapore's first Prime Minister, Mr. Kuan Yew, who passed away earlier in the week. Thailand had the first chance in the 15th minute, but Jakapan Ponsai shot wide. 12 minutes later, Muhammad Sahil came close to putting the visitors ahead. The match looked to be heading towards a scoreless outcome until the 87th minute, when Sitinin Pukom headed the home side in front from a free kick. Thailand then added a second in stoppage time when Poklor Anand flicked the ball over goalkeeper Muhammad Izwan. 2-0 the final score. In other international friendlies played, France have lost at home to Brazil. Rafael Varane had the French in front on 22 minutes, as 3 second-half goals from Oscar Neymar and Luis Gustavo gave the South Americans the win. Iran dented Chile's Copa American at preparations for the well-deserved 2-0 win at the NV Arena in Austria. Ivory Coast began life as African champions with a 2-0 home victory over Angola. And Manchester United's Radamel Falcao scored twice in 5 minutes as Colombia crushed Bahrain 6-0 in Rifa. Defending champion Marc Marquez topped the timesheets as the first free practice session of the 2015 MotoGP season took place in Qatar. The Spanish star posted a lap time of 1 minute 55.281 seconds on his Repsol Honda to go fastest. He edged ahead of teammate and compatriot Dani Pedrosa, who finished second by 0.07 of a second. Alex Espargaro on a Suzuki managed to end the session in third place, with Yamaha's Jorge Lorenzo fourth quickest, still 0.4 of a second slower than Marquez. Great Britain's Kel Crutchlow broke up the Spanish dominance by taking 5th place in free practice on his LCR Honda. You've been watching Asia Connect. Headlines in just a moment.
First of our founding fathers is no more. He inspired us, gave us courage, kept us together, and brought us here. We won't see another man like him.
He was the architect behind Singapore's rapid transformation and gave the once fledgling nation hope for the future. How will history remember the man who turned an impossible dream into reality? On Insight tonight at 9:30.
Playing the China story right now?
Well, China as always is about policy, and then a bit more policy. So we think the derivatives of China are a far less volatile and easy way to hold a China trade. The problem is if you own a Chinese equity, you can have a heart attack owning Chinese equities. They're up 5%, they're down 10%, they're up 15%.
Singaporeans are continuing to turn out in droves to say goodbye to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Close to 150,000 people have paid their respects at Parliament House since Wednesday. As of noon today, the waiting time is about 8 hours. People are strongly advised not to join the queue for now. There are 18 community sites island-wide where the public can pay their respects. The lying-in state is open 24 hours a day, but will end on Saturday at 8 p.m. Investigators say the pilot of
and die for us. The troops here, whether they are Australians and New Zealanders, plus the British, the Commonwealth Brigade, is not going to fight the kind of war the Americans have fought in Vietnam. And that is the kind of a war which we may well be confronted with. And right away, we will take action, and we are taking action against all this incipient terrorism. We cannot let it grow. We've got to get Singapore so organized that any illegal, any illicit immigration, any illicit terrorist or saboteur must be discovered. This is the first time we meet here and allow what I'm saying to you and your responses, because what I'm saying to you is as important as your response to what I'm saying to you. And it's going on live. For 5 years we have met here and spoken privately. I think we cannot go on doing the things we are doing unless not only you, but a lot of other people outside know the raison d'etre, the background, the reasons, the problems which we can only hint at. Is my job, my colleagues and I, naturally we like to be popular. Everybody likes to be friendly, nice, pleasant, charitable, helpful minister, particularly the Prime Minister. Then everybody says, nice man, he says. But to be kind to you and your children, sometimes we have to take a very sharp knife and we go through the movements and say, look, don't do that. Or I'll have to, this will have to be used. And alas, for money and other considerations, they force us to use it. But at the end of the day, you are better off, because nobody will believe that they can tinker with this place. We cannot allow it. And we have got enough nous in us to believe, we were brought up the hard way. We fought the communists, and they are real tough, Lim Chin Siong used to sleep on top of a desk in Middle Road to show how dedicated he is. He says, Lee is a bourgeois chap. How he can't sleep on top of a desk? He needs a mattress. So he thought that he could, he'll eat us up. We are softies. He was wrong. That's why he's in England, and we've given him a scholarship to study in order to do accountancy. But we learned one thing: no hostages to fortune. And we will see this place through, provided you don't slacken. I don't propose to resign. I'm going to see my job through, and I don't believe any one of my colleagues is going to opt out of this duty, however unpleasant it is. But we'll see this place safe and secure. We never believed anything was for free. But the lesson is, we have, in the last analysis, only ourselves to depend on. If we lack the guts and the gumption to stand up for ourselves, then I say, write it off, forget it. Then all this that we have built, or just give it away. I say, It is through a series of crises, if you like, stresses and strains that forges a nation out of a group of loosely linked people. Our forefathers came here because they were looking for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Some found that pot of gold, many didn't. They sweated their guts out and built this city out of mud flats. We've inherited it. We've added to it. And I say it is worth defending it. But perhaps it's worth reminding ourselves how fortunate we have been that because of our industrialization and the development of physical and brain services, we in Singapore have had the foreign exchange to pay for all our needs. No one has suffered starvation or malnutrition. But it underlines the absolute importance of our staying keen and efficient. By the nature of our economy, we cannot afford to slacken and become easygoing. We have given to us this small island, but a very valuable piece of real estate, the most valuable per square meter. We are going metric now, so per square meter, anywhere in this part of the world. And it's because of the infrastructure, its position, its infrastructure, and its people. That's the biggest human resource that we can have ever asked for. Willing to try, willing to work, willing to make that extra effort. And it does not matter if people spread rumors and say, you know, it's utter and complete madness, some of these rumors. But when I had a meeting with the press recently to go through the figures with them, and they asked me at the end of it all, you know, quite anxiously, he says, tomorrow, National Day speech, are you really going to resign? You're going to announce your resignation? You've heard the others. I'm not wanting to be a rumor monger, but this has gone too far. All the time, the direction is your confidence. That's the target. Your morale, your confidence. If they shake that morale, that confidence, I'm glad to know that they believe that if I'm going to resign, that will shake confidence. It's a great compliment to me. In which case I shall disappoint them, and I intend to stay and see my job through.
his integrity, his intelligence, and his loyalty to his friends.
He's a thinker and a doer, and a mobilizer, and a communicator. He has all those attributes in abundance.
He is a man with a formidable intellect and considerable charisma, if not charm.
Expectations have gone up. Unconsciously, we entered into the free-spending consumer society of the West. Parents spoiled their children. Better clothes, better food, better housing, and expecting. All the time, the expectation goes up and up and up, believing that this is always going to be up the escalator. If you want to do good to your children, don't pamper them. Just because you had a hard life, you've got the discipline, you've got the thrift, you've got the industry, you shower on them what you didn't have. It's a different world. In many respects, it's a better world. I much prefer this than what we had in '65. Now, these 11 years have brought great changes in our society. Changes in dress styles, which are obvious, in spending habits, which are fairly obvious, but more important, in attitudes towards the kind of jobs people want. Certain jobs are not considered desirable because workers prefer less pay and better conditions of work, like air-conditioned hotels, shops, offices, to climbing up a multi-story building under construction. We've got to try and change these attitudes. A whole generation has striven since the 50s to make Singapore what it is today. A younger generation is taking this as norm, and I hope will lift it further up the face of the cliff. And for that, you need to have people with determination, ambition, and high expectations, and the will to work to achieve the expectations. So, I want to alert you that the going is going to get tougher. It's like mountaineering, you see. The higher you climb, the more exhilarating it is. But the tougher it is to climb up higher because there's less oxygen in the air. Which makes me come to my next point, namely the expectations of our young, expectations which parents encourage. Now, insofar as these expectations, set your sights high, I say fine. Work hard, get a good education, reach out for the stars. But settle for what you can be. Not everybody is going to be an astronaut. And what's more, settle for the jobs that are going and not the jobs that you think ought to be there. Why do I want this? I'll be brutal and frank. It's not for sentimental reasons. I don't have to pander to chauvinist sentiments, and I don't, as a matter of principle. But I say a person who gets deculturalized, and I nearly was, so I know this danger. He loses his self-confidence. You get a sense of deprivation. For optimum performance, a man must know himself, know the world. He must know where he stands. We dared to achieve. That's what we had the courage to do. People wrote us off in 1965, said no chance. We couldn't accept that verdict. We said we'll make it. And the people had the guts and the gumption, and the government provided practical policies. That combination worked. New problems are coming. They can be solved. They will be solved. And the nub of the problem for a continual solving of these problems is to find new problem solvers, because you know we are not indestructible. Comes a time when the baton must be handed over. We've got to get it into the heads of our young workers that life is not a bed of roses. This generation has never known unemployment. I don't wish it upon them, but if we run into stormy weather, they'll get a dose of it sometime in the 1980s, and that may be very good for their souls. But let's try and educate them. Reason, logic, a package of incentives and disincentives, and social pressure, starting from the home, in the schools, in the workshops, with the full cooperation of the unions. Then we can concentrate our minds and our energies on acquiring the knowledge and expertise to be an information and a knowledge center. We've got one little island, 600 square kilometers. You unwind this, you will not drop down on soft paddy fields. It's hard concrete, your bones are broken, and it's kaput. And if you want to know why I am tough, it's because I know what happens. I travel, and I'm not looking at the tourist sites. As they show me these things, I'm carrying on a quiet conversation. I said, look, by the way, how much are you paid? And you get behind the wrapping down to the skeleton, and you know that Singapore has only one chance, and that is to go up. Tighter, more discipline, up the ladder. You unwind this, it's curtains for everybody. We can't change the world, but we can get ourselves in trim. Increase productivity. The concept of productivity must enter into the mind of every single Singaporean, adult and child. The idea that you can do a thing faster, cheaper, with less defects, with better cooperation between workers and supervisors and managers, and using better machines. It's got to do with work attitudes. It's got to do with education, learning skills. It's got to do with good management that brings out the best from their workers. I don't want to be misunderstood. I think everybody has the right to be represented in the next generation. And indeed, I think everybody should be represented. That is my complaint. That the educated are not having themselves in the same proportions. How did it happen? Universal education, equal employment opportunities, same pay, full careers, monogamy. When we adopted these policies, they were manifestly right, enlightened, and is the way forward to the future. With the advantage of blinding hindsight. Educating everybody, yes, absolutely right. Equal employment opportunities, yes, but we shouldn't get our women into jobs where they cannot at the same time be mothers. It's tough. This has to be confronted. We took certain irreversible steps. We must now take further steps to bring the demographic trends back to norm. We've had the gumption to take very tough measures to get here. And we've got to think out some very difficult but equally effective measures to make sure that we are in a sounder position 20 years and more from now. I learned one thing from my 25 years in government, 25 next June. If you don't attack a problem, your chances of resolving it, if you pretend that the problem will solve itself, when it isn't, it's getting worse, you are in trouble. I would be less than frank if I said that all this change was smooth and plain sailing. It's not. There have been differences of views within the PAP leadership on the pace and the method of self-renewal. Well, I am prepared to try all approaches and will tap party and other grassroots activists to add to the pool of talent. But my senior colleagues, Dr. Goh, Rajaratnam and I, we believe there's no slowing down. We press on quickly because I do not know how much time the old guards have got. But even with the old guards in charge, this is what I'm fearful of. Things can go wrong very quickly. Nothing is more fearsome than to get an urgent telephone call within 2-3 hours of your just having gone to sleep. I've had them in my time, and I can tell you that your adrenaline then pours out and you don't go back to sleep for the rest of that night. And you feel awful the next day. But whilst you're thinking out all the possible alternatives, there is no time to fret. But as with this function, I have to take more sips of water than I used to 10 years ago. I wouldn't like to wake up 2 hours and a half after I've just gone to sleep and find that I can't pour out that adrenaline. And I can't think out the answer fast enough. That's a disaster. I'm accused often of interfering in private lives of citizens. Yes. If I did not, had I not done that, we wouldn't be here today. We'd be the old Singapore, speaking 4 languages, not interacting. We wouldn't have them all living in the same new towns, learning to be good neighbors. I don't think we would be here. Everybody thought Saturday last week was a great success. What made it possible? Because after 27 years since 59, the compare, the announcements could be in English and the whole stadium understood. And they responded as one. They could sing together. You know, we couldn't sing together. We sang different songs in different languages. And it was almost immutable, unchangeable. We had to change it very carefully, gradually. 27 years to move into one working language without coercion. Very slow, isn't it? And I say without the slightest remorse that we wouldn't be here, we would not have made the economic progress if we had not intervened on very personal matters. Who your neighbor is, how you live, the noise you make, how you spit or where you spit, or what language you use. Had we not done that and done it effectively, we would not be here today. It was fundamental social and cultural changes that brought us here. And now, the most difficult part is how to manage this transition. It's not simply just to govern. To govern is simple. But to let the second generation govern is very difficult, is very delicate. Because if it goes wrong, I'm still responsible. If the ball gets shot into the goal, I'm the goalkeeper. It's not my job to build an opposition, but it is my job to make an opposition possible. We can play it like it's played elsewhere. With money and chicanery, we can demolish the system. And without money, you can never beat the system. Is that what we want? When this transition is over, and it won't be very long, it requires a grown-up electorate, one that understands that there are trade-offs, that there is a price, that this is not what comes naturally. We are here because we did many things which went against the grain, but which was necessary to make a cohesive, coherent people out of a disparate, often conflicting, often colliding ethnic, religious, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual groups. And the divisions have not disappeared. They are less and should get even less. But we will not be a high-performance society, 100% equal to the Koreans or the Taiwanese or even Hong Kong. Not to recognize that is to hide our heads in the sand. To recognize that is the beginning of wisdom and a chance that what we have built can be improved upon. We are not just another country. We are a very unlikely country. We all sang. Well, my colleagues and I, we sang. I hope you did too, some of you. We are a nation strong and free. This is my country. This is my flag. We are very vulnerable. If I tell you this, some of you may say, oh, of course, the Prime Minister must say this because he wants us all to shut up and be quiet, peaceful, docile citizens. No. There is a certain element of chance that goes with change, that makes prediction of the future difficult. To get economic progress, you must solve the political equation. And do not assume that Singapore is like any other country. It isn't. It's very special even within ASEAN. It's very small and very vulnerable. And the more successful we are, the more vulnerable we become. It's a contradiction in terms. If you're not successful, people say, oh, well, poor chaps, have pity on them. But do you want people to have pity on you? But supposing they envy you, that's also troublesome. But we want to be friends. Once we have this political equation awry, then we will be chasing each other's tails and biting them. And you have an endless cycle of stupidities, recriminations, and violence. There's one little comment I want to read from Dr. Eileen Au. Task ahead is that of reconciling the expectations of the men and women with respect to their life partners. Reconciling the expectation of men and women with respect to their life partners. It comes down to rationalizing their fantasies with realism. So she gets a long list of all the desirable things a girl wants in a husband. He must be good, he must not drink, he must not smoke. He must be kind, and so on and so forth. There aren't such people to be found, because they go through the forms of the men, they say, not there. So the men put their hopes of the girls they want to marry. She must be young. The man is 38, he wants to marry a girl who's 25. She must be friendly, smiling, cheerful disposition, and so on. You run through the women's list, they are not there. Let's settle for what we are. You look at your brother, look at your cousins, that's what's on the market. If you go by SBC drama, you're in trouble. You will spend the rest of your life looking for a dream husband who isn't there, and for a girl that does not exist except with very careful makeup. Given me and my links with so many people, all I got to do is to stay Secretary General of the PAP. I don't have to be President. I stay Secretary General of the PAP, and I can decide. I will have a very strong last word on policy. I don't have to be the President. And I'm not looking for a job. Please believe me. I commend this because it is good for Singapore. To those who, I think Rajaratnam has been egging me to say this. Actually, it's not, I didn't think it was worth my saying it. But he said, you better say so. You might as well disappoint them now. He says, all this is really to get rid of me, you see. Get me out of the way. I belong to that exclusive club of founder members of new countries. First, prime ministers or presidents of a new independent country. And even from my sick bed, even if you are going to lower me into the grave and I feel that something is going wrong, I'll get up. Those who believe that when I have left the government as Prime Minister, that I've gone into permanent retirement, really should have their heads examined. Remember this. Good ministers are not just those who kiss babies and smile and have dialogue sessions. You can have endless dialogue sessions. It's very good. You keep on listening and so on. It means at the end taking very tough, very unpleasant, very unpopular decisions and still smiling and still explaining. And finally pointing out, see, we are turning the corner. The figures prove it. That's what government is about. You must be prepared to have bones broken and blood spilled. There are sometimes no way out. And you must never forget, you're not cheering a football team, you know. So if the team loses, you go home. You are cheering yourselves. If your team loses, that's kaput for you. If we had lost, you would not be here today. There was no way in which anybody could tell us that we would get out of it. But we knew we had to do what was right. Namely, stand by what we have agreed in the Constitution. And we did, regardless of costs. And because the people supported us, therefore we succeeded. It just wasn't guts on our part. It was guts on the part of a total population. A total population refused to be cowed. We gave them the courage. We drummed up the music, but the people stiffen their backs. And that's the way it has to be done. You want them to perform, please remember, it's not smiling and kissing babies and patting people on the back all the time. There are times when a very good firm karate chop is necessary. And deliver it cleanly. Don't have two chops where one will do. That's the reason why I have the minimum number of people suffering from karate chops. To build a country, you need passion. If you just do your sums, plus, minuses, credit, debit, you're a washout. When we fought in 1962-63 against the communists, when we went through hell in 1963-65, many people thought we were crazy. We could lead peaceful, quiet lives. Why were we doing this? It was an act of conviction. This is my country. This is my life. This is my people. You will trample over us, over our dead bodies. We dug our toes in. We built a nation. Not quite. 1/3 of the way. How long will it last? Will it travel the whole way? Another 30, 40, 50 years? My generation won't see it through. Which brings me to my next subject, the kind of government Singapore needs. We need a government which is both bold and prudent. It must be bold enough to tackle difficult, sensitive, almost unsolvable ones. Very few governments have been able to turn around their population policy successfully. You give baby incentives, no response. We have given not blanket incentives, not maternity leave for the third child, which will encourage all the people who can't afford the third child to have one. So we give it to those who can afford. How do you test their affordability? By the income tax they pay. If they can pay that income tax, they can afford it. Give it back to them. It has produced results. That is the joy of working for Singapore. If it doesn't produce results, and year after year you make speeches and you keep on pushing buttons and nothing happens, I'm emigrating. Given a choice, we wanted to be part of a larger whole called Malaysia. It was not to be. This is what we have. We make it work. And I think if we got that will, we will make it work. Those who are faint-hearted, well, there's the exit for you. It will always be an open country. You can move in, you can move out. There is no other way in which we can live. What made the difference in Singapore was that a group of men in 1963, 64, 65, when we were in Malaysia, we decided that we are going to live only one life. We must die. If we have to die, we will die for a cause worthy of our lives. That made Singapore possible. We couldn't be placated and settle for less. To settle personally for a way out for yourself was easy. And generous exits, golden parachutes, golden handshakes were in abundance. But that broke a trust we had. That made Singapore possible. So the final message I give to Singaporeans is, your future really depends on what you make of it. The government can give you that framework, can give expression to the will of a people, but the people must have their will. If you don't have it, there's nothing a government can do. Singapore is a meritocracy, and these men have risen to the top by their own merit, their hard work and high performance. If all the 300 were to crash in one jumbo jet, then Singapore will disintegrate. Without them, none of you would be enjoying life today in Singapore. I say this without any compunction.
Lee Kuan Yew in his own words on meritocracy and governance on Channel News Asia.
Singapore is this very small country, but his influence reaches far beyond Singapore, far beyond the ASEAN countries, far beyond China and Japan, about which he knows a great deal, and goes all across Europe and across the United States. So I think of him as a global leader.
Lee Kuan Yew is a statesman in his own area and in the Asian countries. context generally, but also on a world scale. He's very well known in the United States and throughout Europe, in South Africa. He's invited everywhere. And people go to Singapore, I go to Singapore, in considerable part to see him.
Well, when I think of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, I think that everyone, in fact, everyone in the world, of importance, regard him as one of the great Asian leaders in the last half of the 20th century.
李总理啊，他是一个智慧极高，一个坦诚、坚定，同时具他非常有抱负。他这个抱负的这个做法，同这个排列，所以实在是一个当时我讲是个贤明的政治领袖，所以他不仅是在新加坡深得荣望，并在世界上他的声望，他国家虽小，他个人的政治声望在世界的政治领域呢，那是非常高的。
Lee Kuan Yew, in my opinion, was one of the foremost statesmen of his century. Really, very, very remarkable man. Of course, he's got a considerable intellect. I mean, a brilliant mind. But he was a man of such a broad intellect that he could pick up a topic and talk to anybody about anything under the sun. Fascinating man.
You say Lee Kuan Yew, everybody knows who he is. You say Singapore, some people do not know where we are, right? But this is a brand that is, I think multinationals would love to have, I mean, you have Microsoft, you have Google, but Lee Kuan Yew is almost like a man unto himself. I think that's the beauty of what Singapore has. Although we are a small country, what we have managed to throw up, we have thrown up a brand like Mr. Lee Kuan Yew.
Because nobody, no group of men have got the will, have got the capacity to do more for this country.
You see the whole of that adult life.
And he had the courage to say, no, we change course.
Those who believe that when I have left the government as Prime Minister, that I've gone into permanent retirement, really should have their heads examined.
This is my country. This is my life.